CatDV. TV. The cat. The cat.
So I said we only had one CatDV joke last week. I think we might have slightly more. We invested, if you can call it that, in some additional signage this week. So welcome to our webinar. As Hannah introduced, we're going to be talking about customizing CatDV. And before I get going, actually, we're trying to do a lot more marketing online, digitally, and using things like Zoom. We've had quite a lot of feedback, particularly from our team, about our little teaser email about pimping our CatDV, and in particular, Ryan on our team hated our marketing. So again, before we get going, this is specifically for Ryan, and here we go.
So you want to be a player, but your wheels ain't flying. You got to hit us up to get a pimped out ride. You got to pimp out ride.
There we go. Enough silliness. Anyway, we'll get going with the main content. Thank you again. I haven't said so yet this week. I try to every week. For your time, we know that your time is precious, and particularly during lockdown, there's a lot of demands on your time. Hopefully, this is interesting. So as an introduction, then, I think a lot of CatDV's success in the past few years has been with our mid-sized or larger customers, not necessarily in terms of the size of the deployment, numbers of users and such like, but in terms of the sophistication of the work that we're doing. And customizing CatDV is a really important part of that. So we're going to share some of the cool things that we can do with CatDV customization. So I'm joined by Brian, and he'll show us some of the cool things that he and the team has built after my little introduction. So first off, CatDV is already a pretty customizable product. I guess we draw a bit of a distinction between configuration and customization. So the kind of point and click interface, the CatDV administration pages let us set up a whole pile of metadata, panels, views, fields that we all kind of know and love. Recently, I guess, maybe Server 7 and onwards, we've also supported metadata on other things rather than media assets. So we can have metadata on catalogs that says the project team, or some information about a project that the catalog might represent. We can have metadata on markers, so you can have approval status and have a to-do list of things you can finish off or actions you need to do on markers, or you can have different markers for AI transcription versus creative work that needs to be done. And we also have metadata on users. So you can say, oh, this user works for Manchester United, and therefore I can see all of the content that is marked as Manchester United. So we've got a whole pile of metadata fields and field types and colors and logos. We use all that massively. So you add all of that configuration that we can do to a load of APIs. And here are some of them. I think I've got most of them, but for those of you who've followed us for the last few years, you'll know that we have been adding APIs like crazy. So we started off with our command line interface to the worker, so you could drive it with a command line and other programs, and rapidly extended that out to our REST API to access metadata, another REST API for configuration and changing the schema, setting up fields, users and such like. Recently, we added one for the worker so that you can use that with REST API calls, particularly for status, but also to initiate jobs. And then some of the cool stuff we'll talk about today. So JavaScript APIs for user interface behavior, for worker automations. It's really cool. And it doesn't have to be massive investments, unlike many other products out in the market. Another couple that I haven't spoken about, the Server Plugin API lets us run code on the CatDV server or one of the CatDV server containers. And that enables us to run processes centrally that are kicked off elsewhere. And then the UX toolkit lets you make completely new custom user interfaces that don't look anything like the CatDVs that we release when we put out our web clients. And we'll be taking a look at some of those as well today. So great. So why am I talking about APIs when this is all about customizing CatDV? Well, we run this thing called API first development. So what we do is we design the APIs that enable a particular capability in the software, and then we build the user components around it using those APIs. So we really do eat our own dog food. All of our APIs are core to how we build the product. Web 3, Web 2, Advanced Web all use the CatDV REST APIs in order to be able to operate at all. So that's good. So we eat our own dog food, good API first, good techie way of doing stuff. What does that mean to us as an organization? Well, and what does it mean to you as our customers and partners? It makes it much easier to develop and customize CatDV. You don't have to rely on us to make changes under the covers. You can go and make some changes yourself, or you can hire us or some of our valid partners to do that for you. It means that more people can work on extending CatDV. You don't have to just rely on our core development team. It's easier to learn as well, right? So as we'll see, JavaScript is one of the most popular newer APIs we've got, and we chose JavaScript because it's so common and garden. You know, JavaScript programmers and JavaScript as a language is reasonably accessible, reasonably easy to learn, and it means that more people can access the cool things that we can do. So we get massive more scale than we would if we did everything ourselves inside the core code. And then lastly, having these APIs allow us to do pretty big changes inside the software, as long as we keep our APIs the same, so we can keep our platform moving on quickly, and at the same time do our very best not to break any customizations that people have already put in. And that is not usual either. Quite often upgrade programs can be quite significant with some of the things like SAP and such like. Then an upgrade of an SAP system might well cost you as much as building the thing in the first place, because they don't respect clear APIs that don't change in the same way as we do. Okay, so that's why APIs are important. Here are some examples of the dog food that we eat. So the things that we build ourselves using our APIs that enable us to have a bigger and more extended team, and some simple ways of being able to extend CatDV. I mentioned the web clients. Last week's webinar was about the projects and folder creation tool. That's built using our APIs. There's some server components in that, as well as some JavaScript. So the server API that I mentioned earlier. All of our API plugins are CatDV Worker JavaScript plugins, and what they do is they prepare media. You know, they'll strip out the audio and make a file or make a stream, and then they'll send that media up to Google and Azure at the moment, coming soon AWS, and then get that transcript back and put it into CatDV markers. All of that worker, a single worker job, you know, it makes it look really, really simple. All of that media preparation, all the API calls to the AI vendors, and then injecting all that metadata when we get it back, all of that is in our AI plugins. MD5 checker says, okay, you might well have done an MD5 on the way in, always good practice when you're indexing or ingesting content into CatDV. Maybe at some point in the future, you want to see what came back. And we've got an MD5 checker that says, hey, was it good? Is it still the same file as we had when we first saw it, when we first indexed it, or has something happened in between? So the MD5 checker is another worker plugin, as is the file path cleaner, again, JavaScript. And we can get pretty sophisticated. Our archive plugins, the archive plugins are going to be subjects of other webinars coming up in a couple of weeks, I think. And all of those are built using our server APIs, and they get pretty sophisticated when we're dealing with camera card media and making sure that that media is being securely sent and received, and things are being broken into pieces and then rejoined and all of that. So all those archive plugins are written using our server API, and they also have worker plugins as well, so they can be automated and you can do policy-based archiving. So we're using a mixture of APIs for that. And then, big drum roll, we're going to be seeing our Dropbox sharing plugin, which is a brand new one that Brian developed for us. And it's a really cool way of being able to get media out of CatDV into a shareable place on Dropbox without having to expose CatDV to the internet. It's really neat. You'll see it later. So, yeah. So, I guess... why did we decide to do this webinar this week? That's what this page is trying to talk about. We want to show the art of what's possible, right? So we know that lots of our customers are getting masses of value out of CatDV, and by not using the stuff that comes out of the box. We really do believe that your workflow is the thing that matters, and what differentiates us somewhat in the marketplace is that workflows are completely flexible. You choose how you make proxies and where they are, and they're very accessible and can be used for other things. You don't need to follow our way of working. You can follow your way of working, and our APIs and our customization lets us do that. And we do truly believe that CatDV is the best of buy versus build. You can get 80-90% of your project done with core CatDV stuff that comes out of the box. But that last 10%, that can be the difference between you having competitive advantage or having a really sweet system and not. So we really want to, I guess, enable people being able to pimp their CatDV to do exactly what they want to with it. And I guess another reason for doing this webinar now is that this customization is quite accessible. So the documentation's good, and Brian will show us a bit of that later. It is possible to do DIY. We would strongly encourage folks to talk to us, though. So we've got a newfound partnership with North Shore Automation since last September, and we're working closer than ever with those folks. And they know our APIs inside out. We know our APIs inside out. So with our best partners, we have a really good team for being able to do big projects, and between those two teams, we have some massive projects on the go at the moment. In hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of services to really deliver very bespoke systems, and we'll see some of those, actually, an example of those in my little bit of the demo later on. Okay. So at that point, then I'm going to show us what we're going to look at. Actually, that's a good idea. We're going to look at these things. I'm going to get Brian to show us some sports logging examples, and even show us a little bit of the code, so you get a sense of what goes on underneath the covers and how accessible this is. So we're going to see some sports logging stuff. We're going to see some language translation stuff, which we did for an organization up in Quebec that needed to have stuff in both French and English and automatically translate. I'll talk about some custom user experience stuff. I've got 3 examples, actually, of custom user experience, one of which is a project management tool. It's not CatDV, it's just project management for media creation. And then we'll move on to the Dropbox sharing before Q&A. So I think that is me. So I think we're going to move over. I'll stop sharing my screen and move over to let Brian show his stuff.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As mentioned, I'm Brian, and I guess the best way to describe it would be that I pimp CatDV for a living. I spend my days customizing CatDV, and the tools and things I'm going to show you today are the exact same tools available to you. And so I'm going to just put up my screen share here. And before we dive in too far, I think it's important to note that all of our APIs and product documentation are publicly available at docs.squarebox.com. Here, this is all the same tools that we use to build so much of the stuff you see in CatDV. And for me personally, I learned most of what I know about customizing CatDV from reading and working with this document. So I suggest that's a great place to start. And with that and a little bit of coding knowledge, you can connect CatDV to anything. So we're going to go through a sports logging example. This is by no means an exhaustive example. It's, frankly, more sizzle than steak. But, a common thing you need to do in a sports logging scenario is you need to maybe pick a sport if you're dealing with multiple sports. And then you need to associate data, right? Everyone in your organization, you have some sort of taxonomy. And maybe you're not a sports organization. Maybe you're a car company and you're selling different types of cars that have different specs. Or you're an ice cream company and you're making different flavors of ice cream that, some of them take sprinkles, some of them don't. Anyways, in CatDV, we can relate this data. So for instance, well, it looks like this is basketball. So if I choose basketball, then I get my list of basketball teams available. So I could choose the Toronto Raptors, and I would see the players on the Toronto Raptors. I could go back, choose another team, and I'd see those players. So what we're doing there, that's all accomplishable via the built-in point-and-click tools. So I think it's important to understand how that works first, and then understand how taking a little bit of JavaScript behind it can take you that rest of the way. So let's look at that field. I've got some sports logging fields set up here. And so the way we traditionally link a field in CatDV is we take our sort of route. So not team, but sport. So we've got, baseball, basketball, and hockey. Okay, that's our route. So from there we have teams, right? And so when we create the teams pick list, we can link it to the sport pick list and then fill it out like you see here, where we put the sport and the team. And that's great. Anyone could come in and then add to this list or take values off. That's fine. You need no programming knowledge to do it. But there is a question of how this would look at scale, right? Let's look at it at scale. When we go to the players list, okay, this starts to get a little bit less manageable, right? If we had more and more players going on these lists, at some point we'd wonder, is it possible to do this programmatically? It absolutely is, but we're going to come back to that because I want to show you a couple other things first. So let's go back to our sports clip here. And we can use a couple of things here. So I want to show you a way to extend that pick list, but also, so I'm going to fill out a couple of things here. We can do all sorts of validation, really a custom validation. So what I've done here is, what we know is in a basketball season, there are only 82 games. So you can enter a number. But if you enter a number more than 82, you get this error, only 82 games in a season. Okay, well, what about in a baseball season? There's something, 162 games? So if I enter a number higher, I get that validation. So we're using JavaScript to run that as well. And then finally, the part that we're using JavaScript in here is when you hit baseball, you see a choice of innings, which there's 7 innings in a baseball game. Basketball gives you quarters, and hockey gives you periods. So while this looks like very basic implementation, I think you can understand that by being able to change these sorts of variables, you can grow this and suit it to yours or your client's usage case very easily. So now I want to take a little look at some of the code that drives this, and then a cool trick we can use to extend that pick list much easier. So let me switch over. And so this will be our sort of code segment. This is not a coding class, and again, is by no means exhaustive, just meant to be a little peek behind the curtain at what we do. So anything where a user clicks a field and something immediately changes or validates is managed by our UI script. And the UI script is a piece of JavaScript that runs client side. That means it doesn't run over on the CatDV server. It's not like your sort of traditional code. It runs on the client and reacts to things like, for instance, on load. When you load a clip, we evaluate this function, and anything that goes in there gets run. Or on update. So when we're back in those panels, we're using the onload and on update functions to update these values. And we'll just have a quick look at some of the code we're running there. So for instance, on load, we want to start by, so this is to do with setting the periods, innings, and quarters, right? So we start with them all blank, then we evaluate which sport is filled out, and if any of them are filled out, hockey, basketball, or baseball, then we show that appropriate field. What is that? 7 or 8 lines of code. And the code that you write in CatDV is incredibly reusable. Matter of fact, we reuse this right down here because we're doing the same thing in the onUpdate function. Because as you're typing that number of games in the season, we want to make sure we get that. So we do the inning setting here, and then down for the game number, it's pretty simple. We get that number. If it is a number, then we see if it's baseball and you're over a certain threshold, we throw that error. And if it's basketball or hockey and you're over a certain threshold on the number, we throw that error. And we just set that right back into the field using clip.set. So that's a little bit of the UI script and how that's running. But I wanted to go back to that pick list example for a moment here. We showed how you can go in and manually enter in and enter in the hierarchy, but why don't we leverage this JavaScript API and have worker maybe, I don't know, read an external file. It's a pretty common use case, right? We've got maybe an intern or some external data set that is bringing in files. And so I've got a file prepared here. And what I've done is I've set up a worker node automation to look inside this folder that I call sports roster. And then I can sort of recreate the fields here. And if I want, I can drop in a text file. I just need to call it players. So if I call a text file players, I can put, hundreds of names if I'd like on that list. And then through the worker node, it would automatically watch for that. And here, I'm just going to kick it off real quick. And keep your eye on the ball there. Boom. So now worker node uses some JavaScript, processes those players, renames the file, and let's go have a look at our pick list again. Bring it back up. So I put that in the Boston Bats, and boom, look at that. Now suddenly we've got hundreds of players available on the Boston Bats. So I think you can already imagine the kind of power this could bring to a distributed workflow. If you've got people from all over your organization adding in data, they could be dropping files places and updating rosters. So for the last part of this, I'm just going to take a quick run through the code that does that. So this we're using in a worker plugin. Now, worker, JavaScript in the worker and across the platform, it's like a Swiss Army knife because you don't have to take code that you write and necessarily run it in the UI script or turn it into a plugin. You can, within a worker step, you can actually just say, well, run some JavaScript and just run 1 or 2 lines. So, filling out that last 10%, like Dave said, JavaScript is so useful for that. So what are we doing here? Well, first thing we do is we read the text file. We use a function catdv.read file, and we can put in the text file that the worker found, split it into lines. We can get the sport and team values from those parent folders using variables automatically generated by the worker. We can create an array of our new values. We can use the CatDV REST API to pull the old values off the server, concatenate the 2 arrays, and then use that REST API to put the new finished array back on the server. Now, obviously, this is not a production-ready example. You want to have all sorts of validation and comparison and the ability to remove players and stuff like that. But I think this gives you a pretty good example of how just a few lines of JavaScript can take what used to be a time-consuming manual workflow sort of into outer space. And so that's all for me on sports logging. And I think at this time, I pass it back to Dave.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. So I think what we tried to do there was just to kind of show or give a bit of a clue about the kind of coding that sits behind some of this stuff, and hopefully to show that it's not completely daunting and huge to make some quite powerful customizations. The next one we're going to look at, as I mentioned, we did for an organization up in Quebec where there's a legal obligation to store metadata in both French and English. And we wanted to be able to set fixed metadata. So, the weather, for example, being able to say, okay, the weather you set the weather in English and it automatically updates the weather in French so that your metadata is kept aligned. And then we also wanted to be able to use some of the tools online. So as I think Google we're using to do an automatic translation as people type into metadata fields. And what that means is that the example we'll see will have all the data on the same page so you can see what's going on and see the translation happening live. But that, combined with our new language translations that are built into Web3 and the new server, means that you can have a French-speaking user that only sees French for all of the CatDV user interface, for field names, and for metadata. And so it makes it a lot more accessible for those organizations that have to work in multiple languages. Also a really cool example of what we can do with customization. So, Brian, back over to you.
Thank you, sir. I'm just going to reinstate my screen share here. So imagine a scenario where you've got, maybe millions of photos across your organization, maybe an ad agency. Think of an ad agency operating across the globe. And, within your internal taxonomy, you've got generic terms, vocabulary terms like sunny or, other things that can be translated, right? So using this new technology to do with translation that we build right into CatDV, you can have your English-speaking person argue that something is sunny, and then the French and German will see immediately the translation. But if the French user goes in and wants to say, well, no, I think it's more of a cloudy day, it will change all of the fields. They're all linked. So in reality, you could have your employees from all over the world or arguing about what the weather is in a particular clip in different languages without being able to speak to each other. But as Dave mentioned, we want to make it more than just translating between fields. There may be cases where someone wants to type in a description. For instance, let's see, this looks like some blue ocean water. And what we can do is when you type that in English, we can immediately send it up to Google Translate, bring down the results, and organize them in, well, here we've got German and French set up, but we support a number of languages. These technologies were made by one of our folks, Sven, who spent a lot of time putting it together, and what's great is that he's given us components. So what powers this, just for a little technical peek behind the scenes, is actually just an extension to the REST API. So now in the API, we actually have this Google Translate endpoint. I don't have the actual URL for it, but we have a new endpoint. So you're not limited. You're not just going to install one panel that translates or one set of fields. You can take it and build on it yourself as well. It's really cool stuff. And that's what I've got for the translation. I suppose it's worth noting that if I were to take, if maybe the German person wanted to fill out a different translation, they could correct their translation without affecting the others. Or if they wanted to replace the contents altogether, let's paste in some German here, and then see we get it translated from German, and we can do the same in French. So it's a really great way for people who maybe are on different parts of the world, different continents across the world, or speak different languages to collaborate right in CatDV. And that's language translation.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so back over to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three different user experiences that are being created using our UX toolkit. You'll notice, at least for the first two, the styling is not particularly beautiful. One of them is just an internal app we use for training on. And so the start sheets are a bit horrible, but it shows the kind of things that we can build and then can be styled after the event. Right? So the first one is a really simple review and approve application, just built to show what we can do. And so behind me, you can see what's going on in CatDV. So I've got a set of page definitions and then a style sheet essentially, and a little bit of JavaScript on the news one, because the news one, which we'll see afterwards, is a bit more complicated. But the first one, example, is really simple review and approve. So here is a review and approve client that is using CatDV components laid out differently on the screen and entirely designed to do one thing, one simple thing. So we've got a set of content, and the content is as you'd expect with CatDV, and we can, oops, oh, my mouse gone. We can play that content, and then we can set its status. So at the moment, that's saying rework required. I'm going to press the approve buttons by my head, and then move on to the next one. And this one is set up to do automatic saves rather than having the save button. So I'll say, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And then move on to the next. And then the color coding changes and updates itself. So it's a really simple application, and clearly doesn't include a lot of the things that we have, like chat, the real review and approve collaboration, which is not as simple as just saying yes, no. You want to put markers in and be able to say, don't like the color there, just audio dropouts here. But it gives an example of the kind of things that one can do with our API. And so we have a little piece of XML that let's dig into it a tiny bit. I said I wasn't going to, but hey. So we have a little bit of XML that tells us the layout. My mouse is going so slow. So we have a custom page with a bit of layout in it. It's a bit of XML that says we're going to have some clips, we're going to have a command bar, we're going to have a grid, and then we're going to show us particular pieces of metadata. So what's going on in here is that we've actually already got a CatDV view. This is a CatDV view, which happens to be a grid view that has particular metadata that's shown. I've got the animal name, the review status, and the clip name, and it's just shown at a particular size of grid. And then I've got a panel down here which has approved and notes on it, and we're throwing that panel underneath the video, and then the XML controls where those things are placed on the page, and the CSS controls the color, which looks like pretty cool. Moving on to something a bit more sophisticated, and I was playing around with the CSS myself, which is probably a bit dangerous, so it's why it looks a little even more ugly. And this is a custom user interface that was made for one of our big news customers. It's based on an idea for one of our news customers. They developed it further. And the idea is that you've got a terrestrial, traditional news organization that wants to be able to share content between its various stations and with its social media team. So how do we do that? So Well, we've got a little panel at the top, and it can be a scrolling panel of content. And this is going to be a CatDV smart folder. So things that meet the criteria of, is this cool content, or is it today's cool content? And then, you can just click through and play that content. There's a little bit of metadata. I've made the colors go completely awful. There's a little download button here behind my head that will download the media. Oops, I'll press on the button. So that then I can just bring that into my project, and I can start clipping it and putting it into my my social media news post. So that's cool. So that shows us the new stuff in the system. But at the same time, if you want to go and browse the content we've already got in CatDV, we can do that too. And so, what we got, some best shots, great. And then we might have our news stories organized in terms of politics, sport, and celebrity. And these are smart folders, so you can have as many of them as you want. They're really easy to put together, and you can see we're making use of some of the other CatDV view capabilities. We can have stuff in lists, we can have stuff in grids, all that kind of good stuff. So that's pretty neat. And then the third one, let's see whether this works. Right. Bear with me. Yeah, okay. So so this one, I'm not going to press play on PowerPoint because it makes the screen flicker and go black. But this one is a piece of work we did for a book publisher, and they didn't need CatDV. They needed an application to help them manage book launches. They wanted to be able to plan production, who's going to work on it, when's it all going to happen, schedule the time in the studio. They wanted the team to be able to collaborate, even if they worked in different locations. And there were 3 core groups of stakeholders: creative folks, commercial people, and the authors themselves. There were very sophisticated rules about who could do what, who could see what. Very sophisticated security policies, which meant we had to be very careful about sharing media outside the organization. We have to manage versions, and it had to be completely corporately branded. Clearly, we've taken the branding off because we want to respect our customers' privacy. The cool thing about this is the customer bought a project management system. They didn't buy CatDV, and talking to some folks, they don't even know what CatDV is. So it's really cool, and it was a big project, several hundreds of days, including our good friends at North Shore. We did the core project management tool, and there was lots of data migration and other integrations. So a pretty meaty and successful piece of work. Let's have a look at what that looks like. So you can see in our customization, then we've got something that's a little bit more powerful. We can see we've got some JavaScript going on. There's some creation of projects, and a project detail and a project list thing. So you can just see from just numerically, there's a load more pieces of content going on there in this application. Here's an example about one of them where we're kicking off the start of a new project, and who's actually going to be involved in doing the marketing, and who's the client, who's actually going to be doing the editing. This work's going to be based on launching a book, so of course that always happens. So it's going to be based on launching a book. So what am I going to do? I'm going to look up a book. Okay, show me the books that that have been planning that you're going to be launching. So we can choose a book. Oh, that's perfect demo, isn't it? Let's load that again. So we can choose a book, and then it would create the project. I'm going to move swiftly on because I do that. Once you've got that project created, then we end up with this kind of view. And what this is doing, so for those of you that know CatDV well, this looks a bit like a list view of assets in CatDV. It's not. It's a list of projects. So there are assets inside these projects, different versions, raw assets and finished assets that we can work with. And so if we look on in one of these, then we get to see a whole pile of information. There's some stuff to do with status and QA, what kind of a production it is, when things are going to be happening, who again is the team. And then we've got some metadata based on the project. We've got different versions of the asset that we are going to be working with. There's other footage that we might have in the system. I don't think we've got anything here. But then when I've got a version up, then you can see in one of our views, then we should have, some chat going on. We've not got much going on in this particular one, but we've got our 3 different sorts of cat chat essentially. So we enable our client to be able to have informal conversation during the project as well. So that's pretty cool. Those are all neat user interfaces that have been built using CatDV components, but that don't really look anything like the user experiences that we've had traditionally. So at that point, I'm going to hand back over to Brian. And Brian, yeah, if you can then move on and show us some other cool stuff, in particular the Dropbox plugin, I think.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, let's see, I'm unmuted. Very good. Yeah, so we looked about, so far we've looked at a lot of sort of client-facing customizations like user interface and things to do with the UI script. But you can build your very own custom worker action. So anyone who's been in a CatDV worker before, I've got a little screenshot here actually to illustrate that. Anyone who's been in a CatDV worker before recognizes our workflow interface. And you have these sort of built-in steps that you get along the left. And so if you create worker plugins, which it's all on that docs page, how to do it, you can package them up into your own custom worker steps. And so the Dropbox connector is really just...
Hey, Brian, I'm seeing your face big and the screenshot small. I don't know whether you're sharing the wrong screen, but that's what I'm seeing.
Huh. I'm just sharing my screen.
Ah, that's peculiar.
It's just a...
Yeah, I can see Brian's screen. I think he's okay.
I apologize. I'm just getting in the way.
No problem. So when you add your steps, they become available to any worker action, and they can be used in sort of any sequence of events. It's like creating your own cooking utensils in a way. And so with the Dropbox connector, this is just an example. You can define your own user interface for configuring the plugin. So my interface is pretty simple, but it allows you to add accounts and choose which account the action is going to run on. Right now it's set to automatic, so it's just going to take whatever we tell it to do from CatDV side. But you could also tell it to override the action. So what does this look like in reality? That's the worker definition that's powering it. Let's go into a clip here. I think another thing that's important to note is that for the Dropbox connector plugin, when you install it, it automatically configures all the fields and all the panels you need in CatDV with no user action required. Now, you can take it from there and customize it further to fit your needs, but out of the box, you're going to get the ability to upload, download, delete from, make a link, or burn a link, like a publicly accessible link. And that all just comes with a click out of the box. So let's upload. I've hooked up some buttons here because I'm going to show you going to multiple accounts. But let's start by sending it up to my personal Dropbox account. You can see we get a little indicator that's notifications from the worker. And then we see, okay, upload to Dropbox complete. And what it gives us right away is that direct link to view the content on Dropbox. There it is. And if we go look in that folder, we can see just now we've added this Mario Jr. I don't know who Mario Jr. is, but I like his photography. So we get the direct link, but we maybe want to take it a step further and make a public link we could send to someone. So of course we can do this, manually, clip by clip, action by action, but we can also configure worker node if, say, maybe, I don't know, if you were to tag something as basketball in a sport, maybe we'd want to automatically upload it to Dropbox, make a public link, email that public link to a producer who has something to do with the basketball workflow, who would then, complete some review and approval workflow. So, understanding how this can all be pieced together is really powerful. So let's see. Now I've made the public link. There it is. I decided to show that in true link form because often we like to, copy and share it or select the text. But so there's a publicly accessible link. But then, you can take it up a notch by sending to more than one Dropbox account. Matter of fact, based on whatever conditions you want, you could have the worker sending to 50 different Dropbox accounts and, making things public and revoking public access on the fly. So for now, I'm just going to upload it to a second account and see how it manages that from a metadata perspective. Remember, so much of this is how do we relay this data that we're using in CatDV back to users in a way that is, at all intuitive or useful to them. So let's see, business. Oh, I have to tell it to do something, right? So upload to Dropbox. There we go. So we're going to upload it to a second account, and then we're going to move on and look at some other stuff. There it goes. And there, just finished. So now we can see, okay, so now it's on the personal and business account. We have our separate links for viewing. So if I tried to view it on the business account, it would say, sorry, you're not logged in. But I can view it on the personal account because that's the one I'm signed into. So we have access to multiple links. And then we could, manage making or burning links for all these accounts however we want. So it's just, overall what the Dropbox connector is built with our own dog food, so to speak. And it allows you to manage assets going up and down from multiple Dropbox accounts, including making and revoking public share links. And that was all built with our tools. So that's Dropbox.
Very cool. And we're super conscious too that Dropbox isn't the be all and end all, but it can be a really useful tool, and we know customers already that make quite extensive use of it, even in broadcast workflows. Putting different endpoints in isn't a massive deal. You can probably see at the bottom of the screen there. There's another integration that we also have to be able to share content with alternative cloud-based storage and sharing systems. So, we like to play nicely with a whole pile of different tools. And if you have a particular need to be able to share with a different file sharing solution, then do let us know. We've done quite a few over the years, and this Dropbox one is really rather neat. So that's very cool. So shall I move back on? I think, yeah, we are working to time, so let me head back over. In fact, I'm going to share my screen again. Let's do some of that. I'll share that one there. So what we've looked at, hopefully you enjoyed seeing our sports logging, changing pick list values, dynamic user interface, changing the metadata based on the sport, and a bit of validation to kind of show what we can do at the user interface side. The multi-language translation, really practical use of CatDV to be able to present it in multiple languages. I ran through a custom user experiences and the project tool style of thing. And we went through the new Dropbox sharing plugin too, which is really, really neat. So that's the end of our prepared content. So I always try to have a call to action, I guess. So if any of this stuff you found interesting and you'd like to talk to one of the team about it some more, then we've got a You Can Book Me. It's different link from last week, catdv-custom.youcanbook.me. And we'll get one of the team to have a chat with you about your great idea for how to extend CatDV your way. I'm sure we learn a whole pile from our customers, and I'm sure you've got all sorts of thoughts and ideas that hadn't even occurred to us. So if you do have anything that you found interesting in this conversation, then do take a look at that and book up some time with the team. Next week, I always do a plug. Next week, we are doing a creative collaboration with CatDV Web3. So there's a whole pile of stuff about managing the life cycle of a file and archiving and storage and ingest, trying to make it very practical about how Web3 helps teams to collaborate better, save time, save money, keep organized using our new user interface, CatDV Web3. So we're going to do a fairly deep dive on that one, and Matthew will be my co-host on that one. So I think that probably means that we are at that stage in proceedings when we can try and take some questions. So you'll see in the Zoom panels, there's a Q&A or Q box to type your questions in. And Hannah, if you would, could you help curate and feed us some of those, please?
Yeah, of course. So our first question leads on quite nicely from what you were saying about next week's webinar. Someone was saying, what user interface was Brian using during his sports logging demo? It looked different to standard web client that they've got.
Brian?
That is that's our new Web3 interface. That's part of the Server 9 release. And Web3 is designed with modern design in mind, but also very importantly mobile compatibility. So if you were to view it on something like an iPhone, you can get all the same work done in the Web3 client now that you used to have to pinch in to do on some of the other ones. It's our latest and greatest, built entirely on those APIs we were showing you.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question was about the metadata translation section. So someone's saying that would be really useful for their team. So what would be involved in getting that onto their system?
Yeah, so that's a professional service. Some of the rules about what things overwrite other things, we need to discuss with you and make sure that we get them right. So it's a professional service, but you can clearly see what we've got in the kit bag to start with. Booker, you can book me up. And when you book your book, you can book me. You can put a topic or a subject in. If you tell us you want to talk about that, then we can make sure we've got the right people in, so that we can be, we can be intelligent, I guess, on the call. We'd love that conversation.
Great, and I guess that leads nicely into our next question, which is somebody's been having a go at workflow customization using the work node, but they've come a bit stuck. So how do they go about getting help?
Yeah, so again, a good place to start is, look, you've come to the webinar, so we try to be respectful of your time. So if you want to book up you can book me for next week. Again, in the introduction, say what is it you would like to do, and we'd be more than pleased to spend an hour on a health check, essentially talking to you about your needs. And it might be that we propose some services. It might be we propose some training from our team to help. We have things like an enhanced support contract, which basically gives you time over and above kind of out of the box fix when broken support and maintenance that we have, that you can use to make use of the fine folks in our team. So the likes of Brian and Matthew do work for customers in that way and get quite a lot of really cool stuff done, and Dougal too, yeah, and others.
Wonderful, and I think we've got time for just one more question, which was somebody said they'd missed where the location of the APIs was located. So where would they go about finding the written information?
Yes, docs.squarebox.com is our documentation site, which we did about a year ago. Yeah, it's all in there. Docs, DOCS, docs.squarebox.com. I think it's linked to from main CatDV website as well.
Yes. Excellent. So I think that's all we've got time for today. If you've got any other questions, please send them into sales@squarebox.com and we'll direct you to one of our team who will help. Otherwise, thank you for taking time out to join us, and we hope to see you again at one of our upcoming webinars in the next couple of weeks.
That's great. Thank you all very much for your time, and maybe see you next week.